nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars. Don't let them end.
Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of our planet's hottest entertainment with an edge in a galaxy far, far away. Jaime En Fuego here to welcome you once again to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. That's right, you can just call me Fuego for short. And this is the kind of the commencement of the constant coverage that is going to be going for pretty much the next 2 weeks. And it's going to be Star Wars craziness. Yes, I've done sprinklings of coverage here throughout the year of 19. Shout out to all the constant readers that could potentially be watching this. But yeah, now with just a little over 2 weeks till the release of The Rise of Skywalker, it's time to plow through as much content as possible. I have done some previous reviews of comic books here, including the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic, the Mace Windu comic, the original Darth Maul comic, not the one that took place in the post-Clone Wars era and stuff like that. It was, you know, like even before Episode 1. All of those being Marvel books. And yes, I'm making my return with the collected editions of Age of Republic Heroes and Villains. That's right. And so technically, since we have 3 different trilogies, the third and final being about to conclude with Rise of Skywalker, we apparently, as Lucasfilm, Disney, and Star Wars have decided to deem it, we have the Age of Republic, which is the prequel era. We have the Age of Rebellion, which is the original trilogy era, and then we have the Age of Resistance, which is the third and final in the saga film trilogies. And so they're essentially doing these, and this is with Marvel still, since Disney owns Marvel, obviously, and they, you know, pretty much put out, with the exception of, I think IDW does some side story stuff with a few things, and I have not checked any of those out, just the Marvel, you know, series stuff proper, but. So they're doing these, they've been doing these because they've already collected the Age of Rebellion as well. These one-shot stories about single, prolific, and in other cases, more minor characters that, you know, are sprinkled through all of their respective trilogies. And so for Age of Republic Heroes, we get a Obi-Wan story, we get a Qui-Gon story, and actually I should just reference them in the order in which they're collected in here, because, you know, you get a Qui-Gon story, you know that's going to be taking place presumably before Episode 1, which in fact it does. Then after that, you have an Obi-Wan story. Then after that, you have an Anakin story. After that, you have a Padme story. And then there was also a split where half of it was a Ventress story, and the other half was like a little like Jar Jar story, which was kind of on the silly side. And then on the Age of Villains, it starts out with a, if I recall correctly, it's a Darth Maul story, yes indeed. So you've got Darth Maul first, then you have Django, then you have Dooku, and then you have a Grievous story that I read in like 2 minutes because it's really just more artistically driven and stuff like that. And yes, that's where you have the other half of the split special that I mentioned. So are these required reading? And this is going to be a rapido review. I'm not going to labor too much over it, especially since each story is very short and can probably be read in around 10 minutes, you know. But a few of them in particular add some enriching little just niche nuance type stuff. But is it required reading? No, not at all. It's not required side story deep diving in comparison with like the Clone Wars or Rebels. I'm finishing up the Clone Wars TV series right now, and I'm going to do a little retrospective about that and just naming some of my favorite episodes and stuff. I'm hoping to do the same with Rebels since it's available on Disney Plus now. Urge all of you, if you want to really, you know, they don't have the Christmas special and they don't have the Ewok movies, unfortunately, but they have pretty much everything else there. So, no, they're just such short little tales that, I mean, no, they're in a lot of ways kind of forgettable, and I hate to just put it so bluntly, but it's kind of the way things are. And so when we start out with our Qui-Gon story, there's kind of a Earth conservationist, you know, sort of thing, because he's rescuing this leader from this planet where they're apparently trying to, you know, take down all of these trees, and he takes her, you know, back to Coruscant where she'll be safe, and she immediately is like, oh, you're taking me to a planet that's filled with nothing but metal, and all that I'm trying to do is save these trees on my home planet and stuff from these, you know, Marauder invader or whatever's. And so it really, more so than even the differing viewpoints on that planet about whether to, tear down these resources or not, it turns also once again into a theme that we see a lot in the a lot in the prequel supplemental stuff like the novels and whatnot, especially Master and Apprentice, one that I read earlier this year. That's a pre-episode 1 story as well. It's essentially kind of the differing viewpoints that Qui-Gon has with the Council. It really kind of fleshes that out just a tiny bit more. And the fact that Yoda, as the head of the Council, tries to be kind of a mediator between the various disagreeing sides. And so, yeah, it's something that in a lot of the more recent, prequel supplemental material about Qui-Gon, especially that Claudia Gray novel that I just mentioned, it really does boil down that Qui-Gon had a vastly different just conviction and viewpoint, and had mixed feelings about some of the motivations and the neutrality and also the use of the Jedi, which you can only imagine that he would have probably been against the Jedi assisting the Republic in the Clone Wars based on some of the stuff here. There's an interesting kind of trip out dream sequence that's kind of cool. And but once again, the tale is, I'm not going to labor over all of these quite to the same degree. I think they're about 15 pages each, so they are relatively quick, which means there's probably a lot of ads. So we've got 4, 6, it's 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. So I guess they're like, it's about a 30-page story, when it's all said and done. But yeah, they're just, they're okay. And then the next one is the Obi-Wan. This is where he is sent out on a mission with a, you've got an Anakin who has become his Padawan, obviously, but he's a little bit older than most of the other kids because he started so much later, and he goes on this mission to this planet, and planet Delanor, and they're digging up this Jedi artifact, and they're, I don't know, it's really just more so about him fighting off some like pirating marauders who think, this artifact that on a planet that there's no record of the Jedi ever going to could in fact be valuable. It turns into a little fight, and Anakin kind of helps out at the very end. But it's really about more so than anything about Obi-Wan having to realize and coming to the conclusion at the end of this short little tale that as much as he is there to teach Anakin, he is also there to learn from him as well and learn through the experience. So it's a sweet little story, but once again, just kind of forgettable in that regard. We come to our Anakin story, and the Anakin story starts out with some cool space battle stuff, very similar to what we get at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. He has actually no, that's the next story, where we have a brief little bit with him and Padme. But so the general that is in the Clone Wars, I'm trying to remember, the Admiral. What is his name again? Admiral Yularen, it looks like. Yeah, he's a name that just, even in what I've watched of the Clone Wars, I'm pretty sure it's the same guy, if I'm not mistaken. But the story boils down to Anakin having a just conflict of interest once again. So he's obviously, more so like, Qui-Gon in that regard of like, the disobeying of orders and stuff like that. Whereas, they also talk in the Master and Apprentice novel that Claudia Gray wrote about the fact that, Obi-Wan is more prone to just be subservient and side with the Council, whereas, Anakin is more so like Qui-Gon in the fact that he is down to disobey and to follow his heart and his conviction instead. And so what the Admiral wants to do is there's this planet that is apparently being used to, build more droids to, help with the Separatist fighting and stuff, and they're going to just destroy this place, even though there are humans that are working there as well. And, Anakin's like, those are innocent lives that would be lost. And then it comes to the disagreement between him and the Admiral of, well, is it worth, like, breaking the eggs to make the omelet? If there is more conflict, more of the Republic fleet, and their fighters will be potentially lost. And so it's that conflict of interest, and as we see a lot in the Clone Wars, the TV series, Anakin, goes with his gut, and he heads down to the planet, and he does not have Ahsoka with him just yet, so you can kind of perceive where that takes place in the timeline. It's obviously before the Clone Wars film. And so he goes down on the planet, and he also has an interesting brief scene with Obi-Wan here before he heads down. But yeah, he discovers that there are actually indigenous people who have been enslaved to work in this place, and that it was kind of a separatist ruse because, if they were to destroy the planet, then it would have been like, oh, the Republic doesn't, care, and they just destroyed, and so perhaps more of the neutral planets would be more inclined to join the separatists as opposed to the Republic. And so that's not the full extent of everything, but that's at least, it's very much like a Clone Wars type story, and I mean, yeah, it essentially is. So yeah, this would have been a great episode of the show. I think it wouldn't have been one of the more forgettable ones like we unfortunately have with a lot of the Filoni series. But yeah, it's one that I definitely liked more than the others, and just like the Padme story that we get right after. And this is presumably before there's been, I mean, people don't know obviously about the relationship between Anakin and her, because they're both very important people, and so the story starts out with the two of them meeting, and we get a little bit of the flavor of those handmaidens that were developed extensely in the novel that came out earlier this year. That was placed timelines in between episode 1 and episode 2. Had some Bill Organa action and stuff, and but yes, this is essentially Padme not even being honest with Anakin about this mission that she's going on, and it's a mission of correspondence and diplomacy, and she has a couple of those handmaidens with her. I'm trying to remember their names, because even though it's been a number, okay, Dorme, that's the one that really kind of rings a bell. I think she was the more badass one in the novel, the one that was, more of the fighter and such, whereas, the others were more like, dress and advice and stuff like that. But so they go to this planet where they're trying to get this neutral one to join the Republic, and it's a returning theme in a lot of these stories that take place like kind of Clone War era-ish. And they get there and they find out that the person that had invited her has been mortally wounded, and there are assassins there that just don't want to see this transpire. And so it basically turns into her attempting to convince this Prime Minister's second in command, so to speak, that the fight is in fact worth it, and that she does truly want peace, and she wants an end to the bloodshed as soon as possible. And it's just very much of the conviction and the character of Padme. And yes, lastly we get to the hero half of the Age of Republic special, which is the double issue that they did. And you've got a little bit of right at the very beginning some Mace Windu stuff. And it does have a flashback and a little bit of a reference kind of to the Mace Windu Marvel series. He's down in like this underground cavernous area, and they're basically being fueled by the Hunts, these freedom fighters as they call themselves. But they've taken all of these kids after killing their parents and teachers and stuff into custody, and they're basically forcing them to become these freedom fighters for the separatists. And so yeah, Mace ends up having a real badass moment and putting his lightsaber back together, and just having a flashback to when he was being trained, and this droid telling him, no, it's not actually it's not put together, it's not like mechanically assembled, the Force is what holds it together. And so despite his saber being broken and taken from him, through the Force he's able to push it back together, grab that shizzle, and just take down this kind of badass looking head of this particular underground battalion. He's wearing like this animal skull and stuff. I haven't really been giving a lot of visual aid about this, but just a little description here. And then the back half of the tale is the Battle of Mimban, if I'm not mistaken, and you've got some Jar Jar there assisting with like Captain Rex and the guys. And so it's silly, and it's very much like that episode, I want to say 303 of the Clone Wars, where he goes with Organa, and he's trying to, I forget the name of the planet, but it's the same little floating species that was down on Tatooine, of the same guy who owned Annie and stuff. And so it's got some Jar Jar humor, mispronunciation, borderline racist whateverness. But so I mean, they're all interesting tales for Age of Heroes here, but as a whole, not particularly memorable in any specific regard. But I mean, if you're a completist and you really like these, then that's cool. The Darth Maul one, on the other hand, that begins the age of villains stuff. This one is actually dope to me because I just find Darth Maul to be such a fascinating character in that regard. It's why I like the the full little mini-series that they did for him, which this does in fact reference, where, you know, he teams up with those bodyguards and he's trying to find the Padawan that has like crash landed on this planet and, you know, was originally going to be sold for sport of kill and stuff like that. And it does reference him taking her down and killing her. And then it's really just a very, very abbreviated tale of Darth Maul trying to just appease his bloodthirsty nature, and he's down in just the lower levels of Coruscant, and he's running around with this like kind of petty thief that's force sensitive, and that you know, could have been a Jedi in his regard, and he ends up betraying him and killing him, and then there's a little palaver with Palpatine, and that's pretty much the extent of the story. And the fact that you know, basically, you know, Palpatine is doubling down to him and saying, look, you know, your hate must be, you know, just harnessed as a tool, but in the same right, without the proper thought and preparation, you're just fighting blindly, and your anger will not allow you to really accomplish anything unless you're a little more calculated. And so the next one up, which is the Django story, this is one where it's after, you know, he's obviously given his DNA, and, you know, they're making the clones of him on that particular planet. And so many planet names at this particular point, it gets a little confusing to remember all of them. Blasphemy, I know, but when you've got so much Stephen King stuff in your head, so much horror stuff in your head, just remembering the name of every little place is kind of crazy. But so he's got young Boba with him, and he goes on this team-up mission with these other mercenary bounty hunter types to rescue this runaway, and in turn there's some betrayal, and then betrayal upon betrayal after they actually find her, and it turns into just a cool example of the badassness that Boba has in his genes, and that will obviously just continue to foster and grow. And it shows like the love, you know, and the admiration that Boba has for his father, and that the tutelage is kind of being passed along. But really, at the end of the day, it's not that incredibly fascinating of a story, and compared to the Darth Maul one, it's a little bit more forgettable. Then we come to Dooku Story. Dooku Story is about him going on this mission where he's still, I mean, this is pre Revenge of the Sith when Anakin kills him, and so it's after that battle with Yoda, so it's, you know, this is in the midst of the Clone Wars, and so he is on this planet and still acting as Dooku, you know, as somebody who has aligned his planet, you know, that he stepped away from the Jedi Order to, you know, go back and rule. To be, you know, they have their alignment with the Separatists, but yet, you know, his full, like, evil, so to speak. And Dooku is a really fascinating character, and I really enjoyed the Audible that came out earlier this year, which was the Dooku Jedi Lost, I believe it was, or Jedi Fallen, something like that. No, maybe I'm thinking Jedi Fallen Order, the video game, but yeah, the Dooku specific novel where you learn about, you know, his childhood and history, and it's got some Ventress stuff in there too. It's a fascinating listen, and I think they did eventually release a physical copy of it. But this is him acting as the Count, and he goes to this planet under guise of just trying to get them to join the Separatist movement. He encounters a Jedi who's there on a secret kind of mission himself, who remembers being taught by Dooku and remembers Qui-Gon. You know, Qui-Gon was the, you know, the Padawan of Dooku and stuff, and Dooku in turn being that of Master Yoda and everything. But yeah, so this kid who's all grown up now remembers, you know, back when Dooku was still a Jedi and was still a part of the council and the order and everything. And so Dooku kind of manipulates him into finding out what he's exactly there for, and without completely spoiling it, you eventually find out Dooku's clear motives, as does this Jedi, and a fight ensues and stuff. And so this one is just okay, but it's slightly elevated for me because I don't think Dooku gets as much love, and especially after you know, that I guess it's more like a novella, but I find his character so much more fascinating now, and I think he's a little more layered as far as conviction and intention. And I still wonder if, when he was telling Obi-Wan in, I believe it's his second film, you know, he's like, yes, the Sith are infiltrating the Senate, and they are going to take over the Republic, and, you know, all this other stuff, join me, and let's... It makes you wonder. I mean, I always thought that he was not sincere about that, and he was just trying to trick him. but read Dooku Jedi Lost and it makes you wonder just a little bit. So yeah, the Dooku story here is pretty good. The most disappointing one is the General Grievous one. From an artistic standpoint, it's cool. He's basically on this planet that has a Jedi temple, and he just plows through a bunch of Jedi at the very beginning, but there's pretty much no dialogue in it. He just gets to this actual temple, and he sees, he has like this vision, and there's almost like voices speaking to him from like this waterfall, like of consciousness, so to speak. And we do get brief glimpses of back, you know, when he was a physical person, and, you know, long before he started like mechanizing himself, so to speak. And that's probably not the proper word, but, you know, like just adding these mechanical pieces and turning himself slowly into this robotic creature that still has some physical organs and everything. And it's interesting in that regard, but he definitely comes off as the pure evil that he really is, in comparison with, I guess, like a Vader or a Dooku, where those are like more tragic characters to a degree, in the fact that they were legitimately good at one particular point, and certain events refashion everything with them. And then when we get to the Ventress story, which was the other half of the Age of Republic special, it's interesting in regard of the fact that this is really Ventress in her full-on like anti-hero-ness that I have read she eventually becomes as, you know, the Clone Wars progresses, and then even after the Clone Wars and stuff. And I really want to read that novel that was based on the unread script, or the unused scripts for Clone Wars, that is with her and Ahsoka and stuff like that. I've heard it's quite good. But basically, Ventress is she ends up fighting this big, huge, brutish dude who almost is trying to take these younger girls into captivity, and she ends up essentially saving them, and they try to give her a reward of some food for helping them, and she's like, no, that's like, she comes off as compassionate, which is how I know her arc kind of went down in the midst of this. And there's lots of really rad, you know, alternate covers and stuff in here. And so, I mean, and that's actually one thing that I did want to mention. Darth does, Sidious, Palpatine, he does have a very interesting moment where he's showing just the ashes of all of these Sith who were slain by the Jedi to Darth Maul. And Darth Maul has this crazy vision where, like, he literally picks up the physical ashes of the fallen Sith and he smells them, and he has like this interesting psychedelic like vision epiphany of sorts as well. That's probably my favorite beat in this entire collection from at least the villain side of things. So I mean, if you're into the prequel era, if you dig some of these characters, like I have surprisingly grown to, and it wasn't necessarily through the prequel films, it's through finally getting around to watching the Clone Wars TV series and some of the supplemental Marvel comic stuff that has gone on. If you're a completist, you need these. If not, probably not. But that is my thoughts here. Much more extended than I had anticipated, but I pretty much just went through every story. If you want to see the gorgeous artwork that we have in this, and the solid writing from, I believe it's Josh Hauser, Jody Hauser. They're all interesting if you like these little side stories that we kind of got in the Clone Wars from time to time. So, I have been Jaime En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, where besides all the Star Wars coverage, you can look at the backlog that I've done since relaunching this channel earlier this year, reviews of some of my favorite films of the course of this year, including Knives Out, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Good Boys, Wild Rose, all the Marvel stuff. I mean, yep, it's all on here. And if you are here for spectacular coverage, well, you probably know about the other YouTube channel that I'm on, but in case you just stumbled upon this Star Wars stuff, yes, youtube.com/The Horror Show channel, where we do at least one, sometimes two episodes every single day of all kinds of spectacular coverage, from trailer reactions, film reviews, video game let's plays, all across the board. Tons of fun. And then lastly, every Monday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, I do a show on the Willis Greedia YouTube channel called Show Business, where we talk about weekend box office numbers from the previous week. We look ahead, and we also have some palaver about the biggest news stories that happened in the previous 7 days. So, I've been Fuego, y'all have been awesome, and until the reel of Ka comes around once more, I say hasta luego, Cinemigos, but I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this palaver, well, in this case, about, physical art of this manifestation sooner rather than later. And until then, may the Force be with you always.